After drinking the wine my daughter poured for me, my entire body went numb, and I collapsed onto the couch. I could not move, not even a single finger. In the middle of the night I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my chair. I lay completely still in the darkness, holding my breath, as I heard her whisper to the strangers beside her. "He has no idea what's happening. Soon everything in this house will be ours." What happened next has never left me. I am so grateful you're spending time with Dad's Revenge Stories. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment telling me your city and country. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm conveying to you is useful. I have built things with my hands for 40 years. Dining tables that outlasted 3 generations. Rocking chairs that grandmothers died in peacefully. Porch railings that held the weight of summer evenings and winter storms without complaint. A carpenter learns to read wood the way a doctor reads a face. Every grain tells you where the stress lives, where the weakness hides, where the thing is most likely to break. I never thought I would need that skill to read my own daughter. My name is Thomas Calloway. I am 71 years old. I lived, I should say, because everything about that house changed on the night of October 18th in a craftsman bungalow on Ridgeline Road in Asheville, North Carolina. I built that house myself in 1987, the same year Junior started kindergarten, and Emily was still small enough to fall asleep on my chest after dinner. Every board was cut by my hands, every joint fitted by my fingers. Margaret used to say the house smelled like sawdust and coffee and permanence. Margaret had been gone for 3 months when Emily came to me with the wine. I want you to understand what those 3 months had been. Grief at 71 is not the grief of younger men. It doesn't crash over you in waves you can brace against. It sits inside your chest like a stone that was put there while you were sleeping, and every morning you wake up and feel its weight before you remember why it's there. Margaret Elizabeth Calloway. 42 years. She had laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. She had told me the truth, even when it hurt. She had held my hand in the hospital the night my father died and said nothing at all because she knew there were moments when words were the wrong tool entirely. I had been eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row when Emily knocked on the kitchen doorframe that Friday evening. "Dad." She was dressed well, which I noticed because Emily was always dressed well when she wanted something. Dark blouse hair pulled back. She was carrying a mug. No, not a mug, a proper wine glass, a deep burgundy catching the kitchen light. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine," I said, which was not true but was the answer I had given everyone for 3 months. "I made you something. A warm red blend, the way Mom used to do it in October. Heated with a cinnamon stick." She set the glass on the table in front of me, and something about the gesture made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Margaret had done exactly that on cold evenings, mulled wine with cinnamon, the smell of it filling the whole kitchen. "You've been in that workshop every day this week. You need to rest." I looked at my daughter. Emily was 38 years old and had her mother's eyes and her own ambitions, which were considerable and which I had always admired. She worked in real estate marketing, which suited her. She had a talent for making things look better than they were. "That's thoughtful," I said. She smiled. It reached her eyes almost far enough to be convincing. I drank the wine. It was good, warm, sweet, the cinnamon cutting through correctly. I finished half the glass before Emily excused herself to take a phone call upstairs, and I finished the rest while staring at the photograph on the refrigerator. Margaret and me, Lake Lure, 2019. She was laughing at something I had said, head thrown back, completely unguarded. I had always loved that photograph because it caught her in a moment she wasn't performing anything for anyone. The tingling started in my left foot. I flexed my toes inside my boot. A pins and needles sensation, the kind you get when a limb falls asleep, except I had been sitting normally, and there was no pressure on the foot to cut circulation. I shifted in my chair. The feeling spread to my ankle, then my calf. I stood up. My leg buckled. I grabbed the table edge. My right hand was already clumsy fingers not closing the way I told them to. I stood there for 3 seconds, gripping the table, running through possibilities the way I run through a problem in the workshop. Bad circulation, sudden drop in blood pressure, a small stroke. Except strokes didn't work like this. A stroke takes one side. A stroke is asymmetrical, a hemisphere failing. This was both legs, both hands, moving upward with the systematic patience of something that had been designed to do exactly this. "Emily," I called out. My voice came out wrong, thicker than it should have been, my tongue unwilling to cooperate fully. No answer. She was still on the phone upstairs. I took one step toward the hallway. My left leg gave entirely. I went down hard shoulder, catching the counter edge, and I did not have the grip strength to stop myself. The floor of my kitchen, the floor I had laid myself, tongue and groove, pine 1988, came up fast. I managed to twist enough to hit my side instead of my face. I lay there. I could see the baseboard I had installed the summer Junior turned 12. I could see the dust in the corner that I had not swept, because Margaret had always swept it, and I had not yet learned to see it without her. I could see the bottom of my refrigerator and the photograph above it, with Margaret laughing, and I could not move a single muscle below my neck, except to breathe in small, deliberate increments. My mind was completely awake. That was the thing I want you to understand. The thing that made those hours into something beyond ordinary fear. My thoughts were sharp and ordered and fully mine. I could analyze, remember, calculate, feel. I simply could not communicate any of it to the body that was supposed to be receiving the signals. 40 years of carpentry teaches you one thing above everything else: when a system fails completely and symmetrically, the cause is not accidental. Random failures are partial, uneven, unpredictable. Complete failures have a source. There had been something in that wine. My daughter's footsteps moved across the ceiling above me, slow, unhurried, the walk of someone with no particular urgency, someone who knew exactly what was happening one floor below and had decided it was proceeding on schedule. I lay on the kitchen floor of the house I had built with my own hands, and I began to understand what kind of evening this was going to be. Someone moved me to the couch. I don't know exactly when it happened, somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, while whatever Emily had put in that wine was still working its way through every nerve ending I owned. I felt hands under my shoulders, the drag of my heels across pine floor, the soft impact of leather cushions receiving my weight. I could not resist. I could not help. I lay there and was moved like furniture in my own house, repositioned by someone who had decided where I should be. The hands were not Emily's. Too large, too deliberate. Daniel Hayes was my son-in-law, 42 years old, with the particular confidence of a man who had never built anything with his hands, but had sold a great many things other people built. He worked in real estate, residential properties, commercial developments, the whole machinery of turning land into transactions. He and Emily had been married 9 years. I had given a toast at their wedding about the importance of building something that lasts. I had meant it sincerely. Standing in that backyard in Charlotte with a glass of champagne, watching my daughter take someone's arm, I had genuinely believed I was watching her choose well. I thought about that toast, while Daniel's hands arranged my arms at my sides, straightened my legs, pulled a blanket over me with the brisk efficiency of someone completing a task on a checklist. He did not check my pulse. He did not lean down and say my name. He simply covered me and walked away, and I heard his footsteps on the stairs, and then his voice low-clipped, and Emily's voice answering. The house went quiet in the way houses do late at night, settling into itself, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the October wind pressing against the windows I had installed in 2003 after the old ones started leaking. I had replaced them myself, a 2-weekend job, Margaret handing me tools from below, while I worked the frame from outside on a ladder. I focused on breathing. A carpenter working alone in a shop learns to manage panic, the same way he manages a blade that's running hot. You don't stop it fast. You ease it down, controlled deceleration, no sudden movements. I breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. My chest moved, my lungs worked. Whatever had been done to me had not touched the autonomic systems, heart, lungs, digestion, only the voluntary muscles, the ones that required my intention to function. That told me something. 40 years of diagnosing problems in wood and tools and machinery had trained me to read failure modes. An incomplete paralysis, one that preserved breathing and heartbeat, but eliminated voluntary movement, was not an accident and was not a stroke. It was calibrated. Someone had wanted me incapacitated, but not dead. Not yet, anyway. Dead men cannot sign documents. Margaret's voice came to me then, the way it had been coming to me for 3 months. Not as a sound, but as a certainty, the memory of her words arriving with the weight of something I should have understood sooner. Don't let anyone rush you into signing anything, Tom. She had said it 6 weeks before she died. I had been sitting beside her hospital bed, and she had reached over and gripped my wrist with fingers that had grown thin but were still surprisingly strong, and she had looked at me with an urgency that I had attributed to the medication, to the fear that comes at the end of things. I had squeezed her hand and told her not to worry. I had been wrong to dismiss it. She had not been confused. She had been warning me. The clock on the mantel read 11:45 when I heard the car. Not a car, a truck. A larger engine, the sound of it cutting off abruptly in front of the house rather than passing. I heard a door, then another door. Then footsteps on the porch, more than 2 people, maybe 3, moving with purpose, and without the hesitation of someone approaching a stranger's house uninvited. Emily's footsteps came down the stairs quickly. I heard the front door open before anyone knocked. She had been expecting them. "You're late," she said. Her voice was different than the voice she used with me, harder business, like stripped of the softness she performed for my benefit. "We have maybe 6 hours before he could start coming around." A man's voice I didn't recognize. "Traffic on 26, we've got everything we need." I lay on the couch, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound. And I understood, with the slow, grinding clarity of a diagnosis you have been avoiding, that this had been planned for longer than one Friday evening. You do not call a crew at midnight on short notice. You do not have property assessment teams ready to deploy on a phone call. This had been organized over weeks, maybe months, with the kind of patience I had always associated with careful work. My daughter had been carefully working toward this for a very long time. The sound of boots moving through my hallway. The beam of a flashlight crossing the ceiling above me. Voices conferring in low tones near the staircase. Daniel's voice now directing someone toward the back of the house, toward the workshop, the structure I had built separate from the main house, the place where I had spent 40 years turning raw wood into something that would outlast me. I had one functional ability remaining. I could move my eyes. I tracked the flashlight beam across the ceiling. I listened to every word I could catch. I memorized voices, cadences, the particular phrases people use when they think no one capable of understanding is present. And under the blanket Daniel had placed over me with such efficient indifference, Something was happening in the index finger of my left hand. Not movement, not yet. But the faint, deep suggestion of sensation returning like a pilot light, catching before the full flame arrives. It was enough. A carpenter stripped of every tool, but his mind is still a carpenter. I could not move. I could not speak. I could not stop what was happening in my own house on this October night. But I could observe, and I could remember, and I could wait, and I had spent 40 years learning that waiting with intention is not the same thing as doing nothing at all. The front door opened again. More footsteps. Emily's voice carrying clearly from the hallway. "He won't remember any of this," she said. That's the whole point. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about almost everything, as it turned out. But she didn't know it yet, and I needed her to stay wrong for a little while longer. Outside, the October wind pressed against my windows and found them solid. I had built them to hold. The flashlight beam swept across the ceiling in slow arcs, the way a lighthouse works, methodical, deliberate, covering the same ground again and again to make sure nothing is missed. I tracked it with my eyes. That was all I had, my eyes, my ears, and the mind behind them. The index finger on my left hand had offered that faint suggestion of sensation 20 minutes ago, and then gone quiet again, as though it had checked in to confirm it was still there, and then returned to waiting. I did the same. I waited. I watched the light move across the ceiling of the living room my wife had decorated with photographs and the kind of accumulated objects that mark a life actually lived. The ceramic bowl her sister had made, the clock her father had left us, the framed needlepoint above the mantel that read, "Home is where the work is," which Margaret had thought was funny and I had thought was true. There were 3 of them moving through my house. I could tell by the sound distribution, one set of footsteps near the hallway closet, where I kept files and tax records, one in the dining room, one moving toward the back of the house in the direction of the workshop. They worked without speaking much, which told me they had done this kind of work before, or had been thoroughly briefed beforehand. Probably both. The occasional exchange was technical, efficient, the language of professionals completing an assignment, rather than criminals improvising. One square footage on the main floor matches the county record, 1840. Workshop is separate. That'll be listed as an outbuilding. Adds value. Check the foundation. Buyers are going to ask. I had poured that foundation myself in the summer of 1987, mixed concrete by hand for 3 weekends running because I couldn't afford to rent a mixer and wouldn't ask for help I couldn't repay. My father had driven up from Hendersonville the 3rd weekend and worked beside me without being asked, and we had smoothed that concrete together in the August heat and never spoken about it afterward, the way men of his generation handled most important things, by simply doing them and moving on. Now strangers were inspecting it for a sale I had never agreed to. Daniel appeared in my peripheral vision, moving from the hallway toward the dining room, with a measuring tape extended, his phone out, photographing the built-in bookshelves I had constructed for Margaret in 2008 because she had run out of room for her books, and I had refused to let her get rid of a single one. He photographed the fireplace, the window seat, the original hardwood floors. He was building a listing, right here in real time in my home while I lay 6 feet away. In North Carolina, what they were doing had a legal name. It was called breaking and entering with intent to commit a felony. And it did not matter that Emily lived under this roof. A house belongs to its owner, not its occupants, and every document in that filing cabinet they were rifling through had my name on it, not hers. But legality requires someone capable of enforcing it, and the only person in the room who knew a crime was being committed was currently unable to dial a telephone. Emily moved into my line of sight. She had changed out of the dark blouse into something more practical, dark jeans, a light jacket. She held a folder, and she was reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone checking items off a list. I watched her flip through pages, pause, flip again. She pulled a sheet free and held it toward Daniel. "The deed is clear," she said. "No liens, no secondary mortgages. Clean transfer." Daniel took the sheet, examined it, nodded. "Buyer's going to want the workshop included in the parcel. Make sure that's specified." "It's specified." Emily's voice carried an edge of impatience. "I've been working on this for 8 months, Daniel. Every document is exactly where it needs to be." 8 months. While Margaret was dying, Emily had been working on this for 8 months. I had sat beside my wife's hospital bed and read to her from the mystery novels she loved, and driven back and forth from Asheville to Mission Hospital 40 times, and held her hand through treatments that didn't work, and conversations about what came after. And through all of it, my daughter had been 8 months deep into a plan to take everything the moment Margaret was no longer there to prevent it. The rage that moved through me then was unlike anything I had felt in 71 years of living. It was not hot, that is what surprised me. It was cold, and it was structural, the kind of force that does not burn itself out, but instead finds the load-bearing points and applies pressure exactly where the weakness lives. I did not let it show. I could not let it show. I breathed in 4 counts, out 4 counts, and I kept my eyes at the unfocused angle of a man deeply unconscious. One of the strangers came close. A heavy-set man in his 50s with a clipboard moving along the wall toward the mantel, measuring the width of the fireplace opening with a practiced eye. He stopped 2 feet from my head. I could smell his cologne. He glanced at me the way you glance at a piece of furniture that's in the way, noting its position, calculating whether it presents an obstacle, deciding it doesn't. "He going to be a problem?" the man asked, not looking at Emily. "No," Emily said from across the room. "He won't even remember we were here." The man with the clipboard made a note and moved on. I memorized his face. The particular set of his jaw, the way he held the clipboard at a slight angle, the silver watch on his left wrist. I memorized Daniel's movements, the systematic way he photographed each room before moving to the next. I memorized Emily's voice in this mode, stripped of softness, efficient, the voice of someone who had been waiting a long time to operate without constraint. A carpenter working from memory can reproduce a joint he built 20 years ago, because the hands remember what the eyes observed. My hands weren't working tonight, but my eyes were, and everything they recorded went somewhere it would not be lost. Emily crossed the room toward the hallway, passing close to the couch. The flashlight beam moved with her, and as it did, it caught something on her right hand, a glint of metal, a flash of reflected light there, and gone in half a second. I knew that ring. I had placed it on a different hand 42 years ago in a chapel in Brevard with 20 people watching, and my voice shaking when I said the words. The cold thing in my chest shifted and tightened into something that had no name. I knew something that lived below language, in the place where a man keeps what he cannot afford to lose. Emily walked into the hallway. The light went with her. I lay in the dark, and I breathed, and I remembered every face and every word, and I understood that what I had felt for the last 6 feet of her crossing that room was not grief. It was the beginning of something else entirely. I knew that ring the way I knew my own hands. I had chosen it in the summer of 1981 at a jeweler's shop on Lexington Avenue in Asheville, a small place run by an old man named Garrett, who knew more about gold than anyone I had ever met before or since. I had saved for 14 months to afford it. At the time, I was 28 years old and making journeyman wages at a cabinet shop on the south side of town, and 14 months of savings bought a modest ring by any objective measure, a plain gold band with a single channel set diamond, simple and clean, Because Margaret had told me once that she didn't trust jewelry that needed to announce itself. I had held it in my palm in that shop for a long moment before I bought it, feeling the weight of it, thinking about what it meant to put something on a person's hand and mean it for the rest of your life. 42 years later, that ring was on my daughter's finger. The flashlight had moved on. The room was dark again. But I had seen it clearly in that half-second of illumination, the particular width of the band. The way the diamond caught light at the angle Margaret had always preferred to wear. To wear it turned slightly inward, so the stone sat against her palm when she worked. Emily was wearing it the same way, the same angle, as though she had studied how her mother carried it and replicated the habit. That detail destroyed something in me that the paralysis had not touched. I had been managing the hours since the wine with the discipline the Navy hadn't taught me, but carpentry had the understanding that panic is a form of structural failure, that it spreads from the point of origin and compromises everything adjacent to it. I had breathed through the paralysis. I had breathed through the sound of strangers measuring my rooms. I had breathed through Emily's voice saying 8 months with the calm satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding on schedule. But Margaret's ring on Emily's hand, worn at Margaret's angle in Margaret's house 3 months after Margaret's funeral, that broke through every controlled breath I had. Margaret Elizabeth Calloway had worn that ring for 42 years, without taking it off except twice, once when her fingers swelled during her second pregnancy, and once when she had surgery on her right hand in 2016, and the nurses had asked her to remove all jewelry. Both times she had given the ring to me for safekeeping. Both times she had held out her hand the moment she could, and not said a word, just looked at me, and I had slid it back on, and that had been enough. She had been buried without it. I had noticed at the funeral home. I had stood beside her casket and seen her hands folded without the ring, and assumed it had been misplaced in the final confusion of the hospital, in the transfer, in the 10,000 logistical cruelties that accompany dying. I had told myself I would look for it when I was ready, when the weight in my chest had lightened enough to allow for looking. It had not been misplaced. Emily had taken it. From her mother's hand, or from her mother's room, or from the hospital bag of personal belongings, I didn't know the specific moment, and the specific moment did not matter. What mattered was that my daughter had taken the thing I had saved 14 months to buy for the woman I had loved for 42 years, and she was wearing it in my living room while strangers photographed my furniture for a sale I had never agreed to. A single tear ran from the corner of my left eye down into my hair. I could not wipe it away. I could not turn my head. I lay there and felt it move, and I could do nothing about it. And somehow that small, specific helplessness, not the paralysis, not the betrayal, but the inability to lift my hand and wipe my own face, was what made the full weight of the evening land on me completely. I thought about the chapel in Brevard, the 20 people watching, my voice shaking on the words, Margaret's hands trembling slightly as I held them, and how I had felt the trembling and held her hands more firmly, so she would know she didn't have to be nervous, that I wasn't going anywhere, that this was the most certain thing I had ever done in my life. I thought about 42 years of certain things. Morning coffee, the smell of sawdust tracking through the house on my clothes, her books stacked on every surface, the way she laughed at things I said 3 seconds after I said them, as though she needed a moment to decide whether they were funny, and they always were. I thought about her voice 6 weeks before she died. "Don't let anyone rush you into signing anything, Tom." She had known. She had lain in that hospital bed with the cancer eating through her, and she had known what was coming after. And she had tried to arm me against it with the only weapon she had left, a warning I had been too stubborn and too grief-shocked to receive properly. Emily moved across the room again. The ring caught the edge of Daniel's flashlight beam a second time as she passed. She was speaking to the heavy-set man with the clipboard now pointing toward the hallway, directing him toward the master bedroom, toward the room where Margaret had slept. The cold thing in my chest, that had no name, compressed itself into something smaller and harder and more durable. The way green wood, subjected to enough pressure over enough time, becomes something that will not bend and will not crack and will outlast everything built from lesser material. I was done grieving, not done loving her. That was not something that had an endpoint. But the part of the last 3 months that had been passive, that had been survival without direction, that had been cereal for dinner and sawdust on an unswept floor, that part ended in the dark of my living room at 2:30 in the morning on the 18th of October, with my daughter wearing my wife's ring and strangers in my hallway. A carpenter stripped of his tools is still a carpenter. He still knows how the joints fit. He still knows where the weak points are. He still knows how to build something that will hold weight when everything cheaper around it gives way. I was going to need every one of those 40 years, but I had them. And Emily, for all her 8 months of careful planning, had made one error that would cost her everything. She thought I was finished. The feeling came back, the way feeling always does after a long numbness. Not all at once, not kindly, but in stages that hurt more than the absence had. My left hand first. The index finger that had stirred briefly in the night now moved with real intention when I told it to bending at the knuckle, straightening, bending again. I ran through the inventory slowly, the way I check a tool before trusting it with a difficult cut. Left hand functional. Right hand sluggish, but responding. Arms weak, trembling when I tried to lift them, but mine. Legs heavier, slower, the last things to return, which matched the pattern of the paralysis spreading upward from my feet the night before. By 6 o'clock I could sit up. I did it carefully, moving in increments, keeping the motion small enough that anyone watching from the doorway would have read it as unconscious shifting rather than deliberate recovery. I had decided something in the dark hours between 2:30 and dawn, in the space between Margaret's ring and the sound of those strangers leaving my house. I had decided that the most dangerous thing I could do was let Emily know I was awake. She believed I was helpless. That belief was the only advantage I had, and I intended to spend it carefully. The house was quiet. The truck that had arrived at midnight was gone. Daniel's car was in the drive. I could see it through the gap in the curtains. The silver Audi he had bought 2 years ago, and mentioned the price of more than once in conversations where I had not asked. The morning light coming through those curtains was the particular pale gold of an October dawn in the mountains, the kind of light Margaret had always said made the whole house look like it was trying to be a painting. I heard them in the kitchen at 6:45. Emily's voice low and satisfied. He hasn't moved. I checked at 4. Daniel. How much longer does it last? It varies. Could be another few hours, could be most of the day. Either way, we're fine. The important thing is, he doesn't remember any of it. A pause. The sound of the coffee maker. Then Daniel again. The signing is set for November 2nd. We just need him compliant until then. November 2nd. 14 days. I filed the date away with the same care I use to store a measurement I can't write down, immediately repeating it internally, anchoring it to something I won't forget. November 2nd. The day they planned to put a pen in my hand and call it consent. Emily appeared in the living room doorway at 7 o'clock. She was carrying a mug of coffee and wearing the expression she had always used when she wanted me to believe she was concerned. Eyebrows slightly drawn, mouth soft, the performance of worry without its substance. I had seen that expression at school plays when she was 12 at Thanksgiving dinners, when she was 30 at Margaret's funeral 3 months ago, when relatives I hadn't seen in years had told me what a devoted daughter she was. I let my eyes open slowly, unfocused. I turned my head toward her with the deliberate imprecision of a man not fully in control of his movements. "Dad." Her voice was gentle as a hand on a wound. "Are you okay? You must have fallen asleep on the couch." I blinked, let my mouth open slightly. I made my voice rough, confused, the voice of a man waking into a world that didn't quite make sense. "I don't remember sitting down here." Emily crossed the room and crouched beside the couch. Up close, I could see the ring on her finger. Margaret's ring, worn as casually as a piece of costume jewelry, as though it had always been hers. My chest tightened like a clamp turning. I kept my face loose, bewildered, the face of a man with nothing behind his eyes. "You probably just got tired," she said, patting my hand with the tender efficiency of someone performing care rather than feeling it. "It happens, Dad. You've been under so much stress." "Margaret used to bring me tea," I said. I let the words come out soft and slightly displaced, the way confused old men speak in movies, wandering between time frames. "In the mornings." Emily's expression flickered. Something moved behind her eyes, not guilt, not quite, but a cousin of it. An awareness she immediately suppressed. "I know she did," she said. "Come on. Let me get you some breakfast." She took my arm to help me stand. I let her. I leaned on her more than I needed to, shuffling towards the kitchen, with my shoulders rounded and my chin slightly down, the whole physical vocabulary of a man diminished. Daniel was at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up when we came in, and his eyes moved across me with the rapid assessment of someone checking the status of a situation rather than greeting a person. "Morning, Thomas," he said. "Morning," I said. I sat in the chair Emily guided me to, and looked at the kitchen table and let my gaze go slightly past it into the middle distance, the unfocused stare of a man whose thoughts were somewhere else entirely. My thoughts were in fact extremely precise. Daniel's laptop was open on the table 2 feet from my left hand. The screen faced away from me, but the angle of the reflection in the window behind him showed fragments of what was on it. A spreadsheet, columns of numbers, what looked like property comparisons. He had not closed it when I came in. He had not closed it because he had looked at me and decided there was nothing behind my eyes worth protecting his screen from. People show you who they are in the assumptions they make about others. Emily set a plate of toast in front of me and touched my shoulder briefly, the touch of someone maintaining the appearance of affection, because appearances still had a function. "Eat something, Dad. You'll feel better." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I ate the toast. I stared at the middle distance. I listened to Daniel's fingers on the keyboard and Emily's movements around the kitchen. And I counted the distance between my left hand and that open laptop, and under the table where no one could see them. My fingers were already counting the days. 14 of them. 14 days until November 2nd. It was enough. In 14 days, a careful man with 40 years of patience could build something that would hold. I just had to make sure they never once suspected I was building it. Daniel left the house at 8:15, laptop still open on the kitchen table. I heard his car back out of the driveway, the particular sound of that silver Audi's engine which I had learned over the past 3 months, the way you learn any recurring noise in your own home, cataloging it without meaning to. Emily went with him. I heard her voice through the window, something about a meeting downtown, something about being back by noon. Then the car pulled away, and the sound faded down Ridgeline Road, and the house went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when you are genuinely alone in it. I sat at the kitchen table for 2 full minutes without moving. Not because I was uncertain, because 40 years of careful work had taught me that the difference between a good joint and a failed one is often just the 30 seconds you take before you begin the pause, where you confirm your measurement, check your angle, make sure the piece is seated correctly, before you commit the cut. I had rushed work before in my younger years, and I had paid for it in wasted material and redone hours. I was not going to rush this. I stood up. My legs were steadier than they had been at 6 o'clock, though my right knee ached in the way it had been aching since 2019, an old complaint, nothing new. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the driveway. Empty. I looked at the road. Clear. I looked at Carol Whitman's house next door, where the curtains in the front window were still drawn at this hour, which meant Carol was either sleeping late or had already left for her morning walk. I sat back down in front of Daniel's laptop. The screen had not gone to sleep. Daniel had adjusted the power settings, I noticed, so the display stayed active. A small thing. The kind of adjustment a man makes when he expects to return to his work shortly and doesn't want the interruption of a password prompt. He had not expected to be interrupted by me. The spreadsheet I had seen reflected in the kitchen window the night before was still open. Property comparison figures, addresses I didn't recognize, square footage columns, estimated market values. My address was at the top of the list. 32 Ridgeline Road, Asheville, NC 28804. Listed value $485,000. The number sat there on the screen with the matter-of-fact indifference of a fact that has been decided by people who didn't consult you. I had built that house for $62,000 in 1987. Material costs and my own labor, nothing else. I minimized the spreadsheet and looked at his email. The most recent thread was with someone identified as M. Pearson Re Callaway Property Closing Timeline. I opened it. The exchange went back 11 weeks to late July, 6 weeks after Margaret's funeral. Daniel had written first, seller motivated, flexible on timeline, property in excellent condition, no liens. The reply from Pearson clients, very interested. Can we confirm seller authorization for showing Daniel's response? Authorization confirmed, will provide documentation. Authorization confirmed? I had never authorized anything. I had never spoken to anyone named Pearson. I had never agreed to sell the house. I built the house where my children were born, the house where Margaret had arranged her books on shelves I had built specifically to her dimensions, because she had more books than any standard shelf could hold. In North Carolina, signing another person's name on a real estate transaction document is called forgery, which is a Class 1 felony. Conducting a property sale without the owner's knowledge or consent compounds that into real estate fraud, which triggers federal statutes when the transaction involves interstate commerce, which any sale to buyers from outside the state automatically does. Daniel knew enough about real estate law to know exactly what he was doing and exactly what he was risking, which meant he had calculated that the risk was acceptable, which meant he believed there was no version of events in which I would be capable of stopping him. I scrolled further back in the thread and found the listing agreement. It had been signed, there was a scanned document attached, and I opened it. The signature on the seller line read, Thomas Callaway, in handwriting that was close to mine, but not mine. The loop on the T was wrong. I had always made that loop wide a habit from a penmanship teacher in 4th grade who had drilled it into 30 children with a persistence I had never forgotten. Whoever had forged my signature had studied it, but had not studied it long enough. I pulled out my phone and photographed the screen. Every email, the listing agreement, the closing timeline, the buyer correspondence confirming the deposit of earnest money, $12,000 already transferred, the transaction already in motion, like a piece of machinery someone had started and left running. Then I opened a browser tab on Daniel's laptop and typed in my own address. The listing came up immediately on 3 different real estate platforms. 32 Ridgeline Road. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, detached workshop, mature landscaping, original hardwood floors throughout. The photographs were the ones Daniel had taken the night before my living room, My kitchen, my workshop, all of it arranged and lit and captioned like a product for sale. 22 photographs total. The listing had been live for 23 days. There were 14 saved searches on the primary listing, 11 inquiries, 1 accepted offer. The accepted offer had a closing date of November 15th. November 2nd was the signing the day they planned to get my signature on the guardianship papers, the papers that would transfer legal control of my financial decisions to Emily. With guardianship established, Emily could gain legal authority over my personal affairs and potentially seek court approval to control major decisions involving my property. She believed that legal control would make it easier to push the sale forward and hide the documents she had already created. November 15th, 2 weeks after the signing, the house would belong to someone else. The machinery had been running for 23 days without my knowledge. It would run for 27 more if I did nothing. I closed the browser tab. I closed the email. I restored the spreadsheet to exactly the position it had been in when I sat down checking the screenshot on my phone to confirm the window placement matched. I pushed my chair back to the angle it had been at. I stood up, walked back to the couch, and arranged myself in the approximate position of a man who had been resting there all morning. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, I recognized the distinction, now having felt both. My hands were shaking from the specific fury of a man who has just seen the full architecture of what was built against him and understands for the first time its true dimensions. They had sold my house. The house I had built board by board, joint by joint with my own hands and my father's help on a summer weekend 37 years ago. They had sold it, and they had done it while I ate cereal for dinner and grieved my wife, and never once thought to look. Outside, a car turned onto Ridgeline Road. Not the Audi, a different engine. I let my eyes close and my breathing slow and my shoulders drop, and by the time the front door opened at 11:55, I was to all appearances exactly what Emily needed me to be. An old man, asleep, unaware. 27 days left on a clock I was only now beginning to read. Emily went upstairs to take a call at 3:15, and I had maybe 20 minutes. I knew her phone calls. 3 months of living under the same roof had taught me their rhythms the way a woodworker learns the behavior of a particular species, where it splits, where it holds, where the grain runs, contrary to expectation. Emily's business calls ran between 20 and 40 minutes. Her calls with friends were shorter. Whatever she was discussing now, I had heard the particular clipped efficiency in her voice before she reached the top of the stairs, and I put my estimate at 25 minutes minimum. I stood up from the couch, slowly letting my body confirm what it had been telling me since this morning, that the drug had cleared enough to function, that my legs would hold me, that I was beneath the performance I had been giving since 7 o'clock. Still Thomas Calloway, and not the diminished version of him Emily needed me to be. I walked to the back door and out into the yard. The October air hit me like a correction. Cold and clean and carrying the smell of fallen leaves and the particular sharpness of the mountains at this elevation 4-pack of Blue Ridge air that Margaret had said was the reason she would never leave Asheville, even if someone offered her something better somewhere else. There was nothing better somewhere else, she had said. She had been right about most things. My workshop sat at the back of the property, a separate structure I had built in 1994 when the garage had become too small for the work I was taking on. 1,200 square feet of workspace, insulated walls, proper ventilation, a dust collection system I had assembled from parts over the course of 2 winters. The door had a deadbolt that I had installed myself, and for which I had never given Emily a key. I had not done this with any intention of future strategy. I had done it because a workshop is a private place the way a man's thoughts are private, and I had simply never seen a reason to extend the invitation. That oversight had become, without my planning it, the one room in my house they hadn't mapped. I unlocked the door and stepped inside and pulled it shut behind me. The smell of it steadied me. Wood shavings and linseed oil and the cold metal of tools that hadn't been used in 3 months. Since Margaret died, I hadn't been able to work. I had come out here twice, stood in the middle of the floor, picked up a chisel, set it down, and gone back inside. The work required a kind of forward attention I hadn't been able to manufacture. Everything I built was for after and after had lost its shape. I sat on the stool beside my main workbench and took out my phone and called my son. Junior Calloway was 44 years old and lived in Charlotte 2 hours east on Interstate 26, close enough to visit easily, far enough that he hadn't been visiting as often as either of us intended since Margaret got sick. He was a high school history teacher, which suited him in ways that carpentry had suited me. It matched the grain of who he was. He was patient, precise, better at listening than talking, and he had inherited from Margaret a quality I had always valued above most others, which was that, when he told you something was true, it was true. He answered on the second ring. Dad. Not surprised exactly, but alert, the tone of a man who has been waiting for a call he knew was coming without knowing when. You okay? No, I said. But I'm better than I was this morning. A pause. What happened? I told him. Not everything. I didn't have 25 minutes for everything. I gave him the architecture, the wine on Friday night, the paralysis, the strangers moving through the house, Emily's voice saying 8 months like it was an accomplishment, the laptop, the listing, the forged signature with the wrong loop on the T, the closing date of November 15th and the signing date of November 2nd, and the 14 days that separated me from losing everything Margaret and I had spent 42 years building. Junior was quiet for the length of time it took me to say all of it. When I finished, he didn't ask me if I was sure. He didn't suggest alternative explanations. He didn't say anything about family and difficulty and giving people the benefit of the doubt, which was what most people said when you told them something they didn't want to be true about someone they shared blood with. He said, "I'll be there tomorrow morning." What time does Emily leave the house? Something cracked open in my chest, not breaking, the opposite of breaking. The specific relief of a load-bearing joint that has been holding alone finally receiving the support it was designed to work with. She usually leaves by 8, I said. Goes to the gym before her meetings. I'll be there at 8:15, park down the street. End of the block. There's a turnout by the Whitman property. Got it. A pause. Then, Dad, don't do anything until I get there. Don't confront her. Don't move anything. Don't let her know you know. Can you do that? I've been doing it since 7 this morning, I said. Right. I could hear something shift in his voice, not quite pride, something quieter than that, more like recognition. Obviously. I almost smiled. Junior had always had Margaret's timing. There's something else, I said. Your mother used to say in the last weeks, she said it more than once, that everything I needed was in the workshop. I always thought she meant tools, equipment. I think she meant something else. Silence on the line. Junior was thinking. I could always tell by the quality of his silence, which was active rather than empty, a man sorting through information rather than waiting for more of it. Then we look in the workshop, he said. Together. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. I agreed. I heard Emily's footsteps cross the floor above me. The call was ending. I had maybe 4 minutes before she came downstairs and noticed the back door. I have to go, I said. Don't call this number. Emily checks my phone. I'll text from my work phone. Another pause. Dad. Yeah. She picked the wrong man to underestimate. I hung up. I sat for one more moment in the workshop that smelled of 40 years of careful work, surrounded by tools that had built the house above me and the furniture inside it, and more things than I could count that were now scattered across Asheville in other people's homes, holding their weight quietly the way good work always does. Then I stood up, locked the door behind me, and walked back across the yard toward the house with my shoulders rounded and my chin down, and every external sign of a man who had simply stepped outside for some air. The back door opened. Emily was standing in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, her voice catching that particular note of theatrical concern she had been performing all day. "I was looking for you." "Just needed some air," I said. "The workshop smell reminds me of your mother." Her expression shifted that flicker again, the one I had learned to read in the last 12 hours. Awareness suppressed. "Come inside," she said. "It's getting cold." I followed her in. 13 days remaining. Junior was coming in the morning. I was in the workshop by 5 o'clock. The house was still dark. Emily's bedroom light had gone off at 11:30. I had watched the strip of light under her door from the hallway, waiting the way I used to wait for the lumber kiln to reach temperature before committing good wood to it. When the light went out, I gave it another hour lying on the couch with my eyes open and my breathing deliberate, and then I rose and dressed in the dark and moved through the house without turning on a single light, navigating by memory and the faint orange glow of the street lamp through the front window. I had lived in this house for 37 years. I could walk every inch of it blind. The back door opened without sound. I had rehung it myself 2 summers ago when the original hinges started binding, and I had fitted it with the kind of precision that meant it would seat and release cleanly for another 20 years. Small satisfactions. The kind that accumulate into a life if you're paying attention. Outside, the mountain air was sharp enough to see my breath. The workshop door opened to the smell that had steadied me the day before. Wood and oil and cold metal, and I pulled the door shut behind me and turned on the single work lamp above the main bench, which threw a focused cone of light without illuminating the windows from outside. Margaret had told me 3 times in her final weeks, "Everything you need is in the workshop, Tom. Remember that." I had thought she meant the work itself. The continuity of it, the forward motion of making things that would outlast the maker. I had stood in this room twice since her funeral, and understood her words as comfort, as a widowmaker's gentle instruction to keep going. I had been wrong about that interpretation, and the wrongness of it sat in my chest now with the particular weight of a man who has missed a message from someone who is no longer available to repeat it. I went to the storage wall on the north side of the workshop. Floor-to-ceiling shelving I had built in 1996, each shelf sized to specific purposes, lumber stock on the bottom, hardware in the middle, finishing supplies and specialty items at the top. The middle section held 30 years of accumulated hardware, mason jars of sorted screws, coffee cans of nails, organized by gauge small cardboard boxes of specialty fasteners I had collected. Because you never knew when you would need a particular thing, and I had a deep aversion to being caught without what the job required. Behind the rightmost column of mason jars on the second shelf from the bottom was a gap I had never filled. I had not filled it because Margaret had asked me not to. In 1995, the year I built these shelves, she had come out to the workshop while I was finishing the middle section and had looked at the layout with the evaluating eye she brought to everything and had said, "Leave that corner empty for me, Tom. I might need it." I had left it empty. I had never asked why. In 42 years of marriage, I had learned that Margaret's instincts about what she might need were worth accommodating without explanation. I moved the mason jars aside and reached into the gap. My hand found it immediately. A box, maybe 12 inches by 8, maybe 4 inches deep. Wood cherry by the feel of it, smooth and dense, the grain tight under my fingertips. I had made this box. I recognized it by touch before I brought it into the light. A small keepsake box I had built for Margaret in 1995. The same year I built these shelves fitted with a small brass clasp I had ordered from a specialty catalog because she had admired a similar one in a magazine. I had given it to her for their anniversary, and she had kept it on her nightstand for years before it disappeared. I had assumed she moved it somewhere. I had never asked. She had put it here, in my workshop. In the gap she had asked me to leave for her. I carried it to the workbench and set it under the lamp. The brass clasp opened with a sound I remembered from 29 years of watching Margaret open and close it, a small, precise click that seemed too loud in the quiet workshop. Inside, arranged with the careful deliberateness of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and why, were 4 items. A folded document. The original deed to the house dated 1987, my name, and Margaret's name printed in the clean typography of a county recording office. I picked it up carefully. It was the original, not a copy. Margaret had retrieved it from wherever we kept important papers and placed it here, where Emily could not find it, where the people who came in the night with their flashlights and their clipboards could not get to it. A small envelope sealed. On the front, in Margaret's handwriting, bank check January statements. A photograph face down. I turned it over. Emily, maybe 16 years old, standing in this workshop holding a chisel I had given her to try. She had lasted 20 minutes before deciding woodworking was not for her and going back inside. I had kept working. I remembered being mildly disappointed and then deciding the memory of the 20 minutes was enough. I did not understand why Margaret had kept this photograph here until I looked more closely. Behind Emily's left wrist, visible because she had pushed her sleeve up before taking the chisel, a habit she had even then, was a thin gold bracelet. I had never seen that bracelet before. It was not one I had given Margaret. I turned the photograph toward the light and looked at it carefully. The bracelet caught the workshop light at the angle of something with a particular surface finish. Then I set it down and picked up the last item. A letter. My name on the envelope, Thomas, in the handwriting that had written shopping lists and birthday cards, and the occasional note left on my workbench when Margaret wanted to tell me something, and I was too deep in the work to interrupt. I had not seen that handwriting in 3 months, and the sight of it drove the air out of my chest as efficiently as a physical blow. I sat down on my stool. I held the envelope for a long moment without opening it, feeling the weight of it, which was slight and which contained everything. Then I opened it. My dear Tom, she had written. If you are reading this in the workshop, it means you found what you needed when you needed it. That was always the way with you in this room. I'm going to tell you some things now that I should have told you sooner, and I am sorry for the delay. I was protecting you from something I am no longer able to protect you from. The workshop lamp hummed above me. Outside on Ridgeline Road, a car passed without slowing. I read my wife's words in the cold and the quiet and the smell of wood shavings, and by the time I finished, I was shaking not with grief, though grief was there threaded through everything, as it had been for 3 months. I was shaking with the recognition that the woman I had loved for 42 years had spent her final weeks fighting a war on my behalf, and had won the opening move from a hospital bed, and had left me the weapons to finish it. She had known. She had known everything. From outside, I heard Emily's alarm go off through the bedroom window. 5:58. I had 2 hours and 17 minutes before Junior arrived. Emily left at 7:58, gym bag over her shoulder, car keys in hand, not looking back. I watched her reverse out of the driveway from the living room window, standing far enough back that I was in shadow, close enough to confirm the direction she turned. Left on Ridgeline, heading toward the fitness center on Merriman Avenue that she had joined 2 weeks after moving in another monthly expense billed to the household account, which I had not questioned at the time because I had been grieving and because questioning felt like ingratitude for the company. I understood now that the gym membership, like the moving in, like the warm wine on a Friday evening, had been a line item in a much larger budget I had never been shown. I gave her 5 minutes. Then I put on my jacket, wrote a note. Gone to get my prescription refilled back by noon, and left it on the kitchen table where Daniel would see it if he came home before I returned. Daniel had not slept in the house last night. I had heard only Emily's footsteps overhead, which either meant he had stayed elsewhere or I had slept through his return and departure, and either way, his absence simplified the morning. I walked to the end of Ridgeline Road and turned left at the Whitman property. Junior's truck was pulled into the turnout exactly where I had told him a dark blue Ford F-250 with a Charlotte Hornets decal on the rear window that Margaret had always said was the only thing about Junior she didn't understand. He was standing outside it when I came around the corner, hands in his jacket pockets, watching me walk toward him with an expression I recognized as the one he had inherited from Margaret. The look of someone absorbing information before deciding what to do with it. He was taller than I remembered, which was not possible but was nevertheless true in the way that children always surprise you when you see them outside the context of your own house. He crossed the distance between us in 4 steps and put his arms around me without saying anything first, and I held on to my son in the October cold on the side of Ridgeline Road and felt something I had not felt since the morning of Margaret's funeral, the specific physical comfort of another person who shares your grief because the loss is also theirs. We did not linger. There was no time for lingering. Cars around the block, Junior said, stepping back. Pete's already at the coffee shop. He got there early. Of course he did, I said. Pete Garza had been arriving early to everything for as long as I had known him. He had worked in my shop for 21 years from the time he was 37 until I closed the business after Margaret got sick, and in 21 years I could not recall a single morning when Pete had not been in the shop before me with the coffee already made and the day's work mentally organized. He was 58 years old, built like a man who had spent his whole life lifting things that needed lifting, with hands that were as calloused as mine, and a face that had been weathered by the same combination of sun and sawdust. He had been at Margaret's funeral. He had not spoken much. He had shaken my hand afterward with both of his, and looked at me and nodded once, and that had been exactly the right amount. The coffee shop was on Lexington Avenue 4 blocks from the house, close enough to walk, which we did moving at a pace designed to look like 2 men on a morning errand, rather than a father and son executing the opening moves of a counteroffensive. Pete was at a corner table with 3 coffees already waiting. He stood when he saw us, shook Junior's hand with the evaluating grip of a man who judges character through the palms, appeared satisfied, and sat back down. "You look better than I expected," he said to me. "I feel worse than I look," I said. "Good." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Means you're being honest." I spread the evidence on the table. Not the originals, I had left those in the workshop locked in the box. The box locked in the gap behind the mason jars. I had photographed everything on my phone the night before, and I laid the phone between us and walked them through it systematically. The emails, the listing, the forged signature. The deed Margaret had preserved, the photograph with the bracelet detail. I had not yet fully understood the portions of her letter that were relevant to what we needed to do in the next 13 days. Junior read everything twice. Pete read it once, slowly moving his lips slightly, the way he always had when processing information that required his full attention, which Margaret had always found endearing, and which I had always found reliable. Pete did not skim. "Cameras," Pete said when he finished. "Small ones. I've got 2 from the shop security system I upgraded last spring. Never got around to returning the old units." He looked at me. They're wireless. Record to an app on your phone. Motion activated. How hard to install? Junior asked. 20 minutes each. You need a power outlet within 6 feet and something to hide them behind. Pete looked at me again. You've got picture frames in that living room, big ones. Margaret's photographs, I said. They'll work. He picked up his coffee. I can come by this afternoon. Emily going to be home. She has a showing at 2. I said. I had overheard the appointment confirmed on her phone the previous afternoon. Daniel doesn't come back until evening. I'll be there at 2:15. Pete set his mug down. I'll tell her I'm dropping off a tool I borrowed. She doesn't know me well enough to question it. Junior was watching Pete with the expression of a man recalibrating an assumption. You've done this kind of thing before. I've never helped a man catch his daughter stealing his house before, Pete said evenly. But I've been in tight spaces and had to work fast and quiet. 40 years in carpentry shops, you develop certain skills. Junior almost smiled. Fair enough. I picked up my coffee. It was the right temperature. Pete had timed it the way he timed everything. I looked at the two of them across the small table, my son and my oldest colleague, both of whom had shown up, without being asked twice and without requiring explanation of why this mattered, or reassurance that it was real. Junior had driven 2 hours. Pete had arrived early with coffee prepared. Some people you build a life with deliberately. Others you discover you have been building with all along, and the joint only becomes visible when weight is applied. 13 days, I said. 13 days, Junior confirmed. Pete drank his coffee. Then we shouldn't waste the morning. He paid for the coffees before either of us could reach for a wallet, an old habit from the years when I had always paid for lunch on the job sites. And he had always been looking for a way to balance the account. Some arrangements run in one direction for a long time before the direction reverses. We walked back toward Ridgeline Road in the October morning, 3 men with a plan, and enough between them to execute it. And I thought about what Margaret had written in her letter, the last line which I had not shared with either of them yet, because it required more explanation than the morning allowed. She had written, "The bracelet will tell you everything. Find out where it came from." I did not yet know what that meant, but I had 13 days to find out. Pete arrived at 2:13, 2 minutes early, which was as close to late as he ever came. He knocked at the front door with the unhurried confidence of a man returning a borrowed tool, which was exactly what he was doing. A hand router I had lent him in July that he had brought back in a canvas bag, along with 2 wireless cameras the size of a deck of cards, their lenses no larger than a shirt button. I let him in, and we moved through the house quickly, Pete assessing each room with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades identifying where things should go and how to make them stay there. Living room first, he said. That's where the signing will happen most likely. Big table, central space. The signing is November 2nd, I said. 11 days. Pete set his canvas bag on the coffee table and began unpacking with the methodical efficiency I had watched him apply to every task for 21 years. The first camera was smaller than I had expected, a matte black rectangle that would disappear against the dark wood of Margaret's picture frame once it was properly seated. He had brought mounting adhesive a small level and a phone already loaded with the monitoring application. He had done his research between the coffee shop and now. Hold this, he said, handing me the frame, the large one above the mantel, the photograph of Margaret and me at the Blue Ridge Parkway overlook in 2015. I held it steady while Pete worked behind it, his hands moving with the quiet sureness of someone for whom precision was not an effort, but a habit. 3 minutes. The camera seated flush against the back edge of the frame lens angled down to capture the full width of the living room. He rehung the frame and stepped back and looked at it, and looked at me. You'd never know, he said. Margaret would have noticed, I said. Pete almost smiled. Yes, she would have. We moved to the kitchen. The second camera went behind the row of cookbooks on the shelf above the refrigerator. Margaret's cookbooks, 30 years of them accumulated from bookstores and yard sales, and the occasional gift, their spines arranged by color, because she had said alphabetical was too easy, and by cuisine was too limiting, and by color at least made her happy every time she looked at them. I had not moved a single one since she died. I did not intend to. Pete had the second camera mounted in 11 minutes. He was showing me how to access the monitoring application when we heard the car. Not Daniel's Audi. A different engine lighter, higher pitched. Emily's Subaru pulling into the driveway 45 minutes before her showing was scheduled to end. Pete heard it the same moment I did. His hands went still on the phone. We looked at each other across the kitchen, and the look contained everything that needed to be said. The cameras were in the canvas bag was on the counter, and the canvas bag contained, among other things, the hand router I had lent him, and a third camera we had not yet discussed placing. Sit, I said quietly. Pete sat at the kitchen table and put the phone face down and picked up his coffee mug. I had made coffee when he arrived out of habit, the same way I had made coffee for workers in my shop for 40 years, and assumed the posture of a man engaged in an ordinary afternoon visit. I took the canvas bag and moved it to the floor beside the refrigerator behind the corner of the cabinet, where it was not visible from the doorway. I was back in my chair before Emily's key turned in the lock. She came in through the front door and stopped when she saw Pete. Her eyes moved from him to me and back, the rapid assessment I had come to recognize as her default mode of entering any space, cataloging, calculating, identifying what was different, and whether it represented a problem. Pete, she said. The word was not unfriendly, but it was not warm, either the tone of someone acknowledging a variable they had not planned for. Emily. Pete raised his mug in the easy greeting of a man with nothing to hide. Hope I'm not in the way. Came to return your father's router. Kept it too long. The showing got cancelled, Emily said, still looking at him with the focused attention of someone running calculations. Client rescheduled. Those things happen, Pete said. Emily's gaze moved to me. I had arranged my expression into the slightly unfocused look I had been practicing since Saturday morning. Not vacant enough to seem theatrical, just soft enough at the edges to suggest a man whose thoughts moved slower than they once had. I was looking at Pete with the mild pleasure of a man enjoying unexpected company, which required no performance because it was true. You hungry, Dad? Emily asked. I was going to make something early. That'd be nice, I said. Pete, you staying? Pete looked at Emily. Emily's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the flicker I had learned to read the awareness of a complication she was deciding whether to accommodate. Then her face settled into the warm hospitality performance she maintained for witnesses. Of course, she said. There's plenty. She moved into the kitchen. I heard her open the refrigerator, the familiar sound of it, the same refrigerator Margaret had picked out in 2011 after the old one finally gave out. Pete caught my eye across the table and gave me one small nod. Confirmation the camera is in, we are fine. And then looked away before Emily turned around. She cooked. We sat. Pete talked about a cabinetry job he was finishing in Weaverville, a young couple building their first house. The particular challenges of working with clients who had strong opinions about design but limited understanding of structural requirements. He was good at this, the easy flow of professional conversation, specific enough to be credible, general enough to require nothing from the audience. Emily asked 2 questions that were really assessments in the form of questions, and Pete answered them with the unhurried confidence of a man who had spent his life being exactly who he was and found it sufficient. I ate the food Emily put in front of me and complimented it, which was not difficult, because Emily had always been a competent cook, and I watched the camera above the refrigerator and the camera above the mantel, and thought about what 11 days could hold if you used them correctly. After dinner, Pete stood and shook my hand with both of his, the same grip he had used at Margaret's funeral, the grip that meant something, and thanked Emily for the meal and walked out the front door and down Ridgeline Road toward his truck. Emily watched him go from the window. "He comes by often?" she asked. "Not often enough," I said. She turned from the window and looked at me with the expression that was her version of evaluation, that faint line between her brows, the slight tightening at the corners of her mouth. Then it smoothed. She had decided I was what I appeared to be. She was still deciding that. That was the important thing. "I'm going to do the dishes," she said. "I'll sit a while," I said. I sat in the living room in the chair I had built myself in 2001, upholstered by Margaret, in a fabric she had driven to Hickory to find, because she wanted exactly that shade of green, and I looked at the photograph above the mantel Margaret, at the Blue Ridge Parkway overlook, laughing at something I had said, and behind the lower edge of that frame, invisible and patient, and recording everything, the small camera held its position. 11 days. Everything was in place. Emily did the dishes every evening at 6:30. I had observed this for 3 months without noting it consciously, the way you observe anything that happens at the same time every day. It becomes part of the background rhythm of a house, unremarkable until the moment it becomes useful. She would clear the table stack, the plates, run the hot water, and set her rings on the narrow ledge above the sink. 2 rings, her own wedding band, and Margaret's ring, which she had been wearing so consistently for the past week that I had begun to understand she thought of it as hers now. That was the thing about possession. Maintain it long enough without challenge, and it starts to feel like ownership. I waited until she was elbow-deep in soapy water. "Emily." I came into the kitchen slowly, the shuffle I had perfected over the past 6 days, weight distributed slightly wrong, one shoulder lower than the other, the gait of a man whose body had become unreliable. "I thought I heard something out front." She turned halfway, hands still in the water. "What kind of something?" "Don't know. Might be nothing." I moved to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark front yard with the unfocused concern of a man who startles at sounds and cannot always explain why. "Could have been a car." Emily dried her hands on the dish towel and moved toward the front hallway. "I'll check." She was gone 11 seconds. I counted them. The rings were on the ledge. Both of them. Margaret's ring catching the under-cabinet light, the way it always had, the particular way that specific diamond caught light, which I had memorized in the summer of 1981 in a jeweler's shop and had been watching for 42 years, across 42 years of ordinary evenings in kitchens and living rooms, and the 1,000 unremarkable places where a life actually happens. I picked it up. The metal was warm from Emily's hand, which was a detail I had not anticipated, and which sent a wave of something through my chest that I could not have named precisely, not quite nausea, not quite grief, something that combined both and added a third element I had no word for. I closed my fingers around it and moved back to my position near the window before Emily returned from the front door. "Nothing there," she said, coming back into the kitchen. "Probably a neighbor's car. Probably." I agreed. "Sorry to trouble you." She turned back to the sink, reached for her rings, picked up her wedding band, slid it on. Reached again, found nothing, looked down at the ledge with the sharp focus of someone who has lost something and knows exactly where it should be. "Dad." Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something underneath it that she almost immediately covered with a careful version of patient concern. Did you pick up a ring from the sink ledge? I looked at my hand as though noticing it for the first time. Opened my fingers. The ring sat in my palm. Oh, I said. I thought it might fall. The drain. I'll take that. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and held out her hand, palm up, the gesture of someone accustomed to reclaiming what they consider theirs without discussion. I looked at the ring in my palm. Then I looked at her outstretched hand. Then I looked up at my daughter's face. "This was your mother's," I said. The words came out differently than I had planned them. Not the soft, confused observation of a man making an idle comment, but something quieter and more direct, the words of a man who knows exactly what he is saying and why. I saw the shift in Emily's expression, the recalibration of a woman who has just noticed that the ground beneath her is not quite as solid as she believed. "I know," she said. Her hand stayed extended. "I'm keeping it safe, Dad." "She wore it for 42 years, I said. I turned the ring slightly in the light the way Margaret used to turn it, the unconscious habit of a woman comfortable in her own jewelry. She never took it off, not once in 42 years, except when her fingers swelled with you and your brother. Emily's extended hand dropped an inch. A tell. She was recalculating. "I just want to keep it safe," she said again, and the repetition of the phrase told me everything. It was the only language she had prepared for this particular conversation, and she was hoping it would be sufficient. "Of course," I said. I let the soft confusion return to my voice like a tide coming back in. "You're right. Here." I placed the ring in her palm. But in the 3 seconds between picking it up at the sink and returning it to her hand, I had done what Margaret's letter had instructed me to do. I had looked inside the band. The interior surface of a gold ring worn for decades develops a particular smoothness from constant contact with skin, a polish that cannot be replicated artificially, the record of continuous wearing written into the metal itself. Margaret's ring had that smoothness. It also had on the interior surface near the bottom of the band a faint mark that should not have been there. A small stamped symbol, the kind used by pawnshops and jewelry resale operations to track inventory. I had seen marks like it before on estate sale items that had passed through second-hand hands before finding their way to buyers who didn't ask about their history. The mark was small. It was old enough to have been partially worn down by subsequent wear, and it had been placed on the interior of a ring that Margaret had worn without removing for 42 years, which meant it had been placed there during a period when the ring was not on Margaret's finger. In North Carolina, the wrongful taking of personal property belonging to another person's estate without authorization from the executor constitutes theft under GS 14-72 regardless of family relationship. Margaret's estate had named me as sole executor. Emily had no legal authority over any item belonging to that estate, including a gold wedding band with a diamond that I had purchased on a journeyman's wages in 1981 and placed on a specific hand in a chapel in Brevard, in front of 20 people who had since scattered across decades. I went to the workshop after dinner. I locked the door and opened the wooden box and pulled out the small envelope Margaret had labeled "Bank Check January Statements." Inside were 2 months of statements from a jewelry resale account I had not known existed, transactions dated February and March of 2022, when Margaret had still been alive, when I had been in the workshop most days, and trusting the house to run itself the way houses do when you have lived in them long enough to stop noticing them. February 2022. One item received valued at $420. March 2022, same item redeemed, $450 paid. The item description read, gold band round brilliant diamond approx. zero point 0.4 to state condition. Margaret had known. She had watched her daughter take the ring from her jewelry box, or from her nightstand, or from her hand on a night when the medication had made her sleep deeply enough not to notice. And she had said nothing to me because she had understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who knows she is running out of time, that telling me would have cost her the ability to document it. So she had documented it instead. She had saved the statements, placed them in the envelope, put the envelope in the box, put the box in the workshop, and written me a letter, telling me exactly where to look. 2 years she had carried this knowledge alone. 2 years of watching her daughter wear a ring that had been taken from her and returned before anyone noticed, and saying nothing and saving every piece of paper that proved it. I sat on my stool in the workshop with the bank statements in my hands and the wooden box open on the bench in front of me, and I pressed the heels of my palms against my eyes until the pressure became its own kind of sensation, distinct from the grief that had been living in my chest for 3 months and now had a new room to occupy. Margaret had fought for me from a hospital bed. She had fought for me before she even knew what the fight would look like. I owed her the same. Junior drove up from Charlotte on Friday evening, arriving at 7:45, while Emily and Daniel were at dinner downtown, a reservation at a restaurant on Biltmore Avenue that Daniel had made. I knew, because I had heard him confirm it on the phone that afternoon, in a tone that suggested the evening was as much a planning session as a meal. I had texted Junior the window from the burner phone. They leave at 6:30. Come to the workshop. He parked 3 blocks away and came through the back gate the way Pete had shown him, along the property line, staying close to the fence, where the neighbors' oak trees dropped enough shadow to make the path invisible from the street. I had the workshop door open and the work lamp on when he arrived, and Pete was already there, having come an hour earlier with the claim of returning another borrowed tool, a story Emily had accepted without interest, because Pete had become in the past week a sufficiently regular presence that she had stopped calculating him. Junior set his laptop on the workbench, and I spread Margaret's box beside it. The deed, the bank statements, the photograph of Emily with the bracelet, the letter. We laid everything out on the scarred surface of the bench I had built in 1994, the bench that had held 30 years of careful work, and we looked at what we had assembled. "Walk me through it," Junior said. "All of it, start to finish." I walked them through it. The wine on October 18th. The paralysis. The crew at 2 in the morning. Emily's voice saying 8 months with the satisfaction of completed preparation. The laptop Daniel had left open, the emails, the listing, the forged signature, with the wrong loop on the T. The deed Margaret had preserved in this box. The pawnshop mark inside the ring band. The bank statements from February and March of 2022. Roy Dalton's envelope with his guardianship petition. The camera footage Junior had been reviewing remotely for 5 days. 3 conversations caught cleanly, audio-clear faces visible. When I finished, the workshop was quiet, except for the October wind pressing against the insulated walls. Pete spoke first. "How many pieces is that out?" Junior said. He had been counting on his fingers, which was a habit he had inherited from Margaret, who had always counted on her fingers when she wanted to be certain. Forged signature on the listing agreement. Email chain proving premeditation going back 11 weeks. Camera footage of Emily confirming the November 2nd timeline. Camera footage of Daniel coordinating the document transfer. Pawn shop mark on the ring with corresponding bank statements. Roy Dalton's guardianship petition filed under false pretenses. Margaret's original deed showing clear ownership, and Margaret's letter documenting Emily's pattern of financial predation going back at least 2 years. He looked at me. "That's 8 independent pieces of evidence, each one provable on its own. Together, Together they don't leave room, Pete said. No, Junior agreed. They don't. I picked up the photograph Emily at 16, holding the chisel too large for her hands, the thin gold bracelet visible on her left wrist. Margaret had photographed this for a reason. I still did not fully understand the reason, but I had learned in the past week to trust that Margaret's reasons were sound, even when I couldn't yet see them. The bracelet, I said. Your mother specifically said it would tell me everything. I haven't been able to figure out what she meant. Junior leaned over and looked at the photograph. He pulled it closer to the lamp and studied the bracelet. The thin gold chain, the particular way it caught the workshop light in the photograph. He was quiet for 20 seconds, which was a long time for Junior when he was thinking. I've seen a bracelet like that before, he said. In Emily's apartment, years ago before she moved. It was in a dish on her dresser. I always thought it was Mom's. It might be, I said. Or it might be something else entirely. I can find out, Pete said. Both of us looked at him. He set down his coffee mug. My sister-in-law works at First National downtown. Loan officer. If that bracelet was used as collateral for anything, a personal loan, a line of credit, there'd be a record. And if Emily used your name or Margaret's name to secure it. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Identity theft in North Carolina carries penalties under GS 14-11320 separate from, and in addition to fraud charges. If Emily had used Margaret's jewelry as collateral for loans taken in Thomas's name, or Margaret's name that was not merely theft of estate property, but a federal offense, financial identity fraud, compounded by use of a deceased person's assets, which triggers additional statutes under federal elder abuse law when the victim is over 65. Call your sister-in-law Monday morning, Junior said to Pete. Already planning to, Pete said. I looked at the 8 pieces of evidence arranged on my workbench. A carpenter building a complex joint doesn't assemble all the pieces at once. He fits them in sequence, each piece dependent on the one before it. The whole structure only becoming stable when the final element locks into place. We had 7 pieces locked. The bracelet was the 8th, and until it locked, the structure was strong but not complete. November 2nd, I said. 8 days. 8 days. Junior confirmed. He closed his laptop and looked around the workshop at the tools on the pegboard, the lumber stacked against the north wall. The workbench where Margaret had sat on a stool on Saturday mornings, sometimes drinking her coffee and reading while I worked, not talking, just present in the particular way she had of making a room feel inhabited rather than merely occupied. She prepared all of this, Junior said quietly, sitting in this house while she was sick. She prepared all of this. She knew I wouldn't see it on my own, I said. She was right. Junior looked at the wooden box, the cherry box I had made for their anniversary in 1995, now sitting on a workbench with its contents spread out like a legal brief. His jaw tightened in the way that meant he was holding something in which was the Callaway way, which he had from me, and I had from my father, and my father had from his. What do we do when it's over? He asked. After November 2nd. What happens to Emily? The question sat in the workshop air for a moment. That depends on Emily, I said. What she did has legal consequences I can't control and wouldn't try to. What happens between her and me? I picked up Margaret's letter, folded it, placed it carefully back in the box. That's a different question, and not one I can answer tonight. Pete stood and stretched and picked up his mug. Tonight we know what we have and what we still need. That's enough for tonight. He was right. It was enough. I locked the box. I locked the workshop. Junior walked back through the shadow of the fence line to his truck 3 blocks away, and I went inside and sat in the chair Margaret had upholstered in the exact right shade of green. And I thought about 8 pieces of evidence and 8 days, and the bracelet I still didn't fully understand. Margaret had known it mattered. That was sufficient for now. 8 days. The joint was almost complete. By the morning of the 27th, I had become someone I did not entirely recognize, not in the way Emily intended. Not diminished, not confused, not the softened version of Thomas Calloway she needed me to be for her paperwork to make sense. I had become something more deliberate than that. An actor who had studied his role long enough that the performance no longer required conscious effort, who could move through the blocking of an ordinary morning breakfast television, the slow navigation of a house that seemed slightly too large for his comprehension, while his actual mind ran clean and fast and entirely separate from the character he was playing. I realized on the morning of the 27th, the most demanding work I had ever done. Emily made pancakes. She had been cooking more elaborate breakfasts in the past week, which I understood as a form of documentation. The attentive daughter providing care, establishing a pattern that would read well in any proceeding that examined her behavior in the weeks before the petition was filed. She set a plate in front of me with the warm efficiency I had come to recognize as her performance of my performance, both of us playing roles for an audience that didn't fully exist yet. "How are you feeling this morning, Dad?" she asked, sitting across from me with her coffee. I looked up from my plate with the slightly delayed focus I had calibrated over 9 days. "Tired," I said. "I keep dreaming about the workshop. Margaret used to say I thought about wood more than I thought about her." Emily's expression softened in the practiced way. "She was probably right. She was always right," I said. Then I looked at Emily's hands around her coffee mug and let my brow crease with the mild confusion of a man whose thoughts occasionally slipped their track. "Margaret is Margaret." I stopped, blinked, looked at the table. "Sorry, I don't know where that came from." Across the kitchen I heard Emily exhale, quiet, satisfied, the breath of a woman whose plan was proceeding exactly as designed. I ate my pancakes. Daniel came downstairs at 8:45, dressed for the office in the pressed efficiency that characterized his mornings, and poured coffee without speaking to either of us. He had been quieter in the past 3 days, not withdrawn exactly, but operating at a slight remove from the easy confidence he had displayed in the first weeks after moving in. I had noticed this the way I noticed changes in wood, the slight deviation from the expected grain, the place where the material was doing something other than what you anticipated. He stood at the kitchen counter with his phone and scrolled through something that tightened his jaw in a way Emily didn't see, because she was looking at me. I saw it. At 9:15, Emily left for a meeting. The door closed behind her, and Daniel remained at the counter still on his phone, and I sat at the kitchen table with my hands around my coffee mug and my eyes at the unfocused angle of a man with nowhere particular to direct his attention. Daniel made a call. He turned toward the window away from me, which told me he had assessed me as a non-factor and stopped accounting for my presence the way you stop accounting for furniture, and spoke in the low-clipped register he used when the conversation required privacy he didn't think he needed to work for. "It's me," he said. "The timeline is fine, the filing is fine, everything is fine on that end." A pause. He shifted his weight. "The other thing is separate. She doesn't know about the Riverside account, and I need it to stay that way until after the 15th. Another pause longer. His free hand went to the back of his neck. "Because she'd pull out. You know she would. Just keep the payments current until we close, and then I'll restructure." He listened. His shoulders tightened. "I know what I said." I'm telling you, it's handled." He hung up, stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the backyard, at the workshop, at the October yard that was now fully stripped of leaves and showing its winter bones. Then he turned and looked at me. I was staring at the grain of the kitchen table with the vacant attention of a man absorbed in nothing. The same table Margaret had refinished in 2009. The same table where I had eaten breakfast with my children for 30 years, and with my wife for 42, and with my daughter's plan for 3 months, without understanding what I was sitting across from. "Thomas," Daniel said. I looked up. Slow, slightly unfocused. He studied me for 3 seconds, with the assessing look I had come to know well, the rapid professional calculation of a man who deals in assets and liabilities and is constantly sorting the people around him into one category or the other. Then he looked away. He had sorted me. I was not a problem. He put his jacket on and left for the office without saying goodbye to anyone because there was no one in the room he considered worth the courtesy. I sat at the kitchen table for 5 minutes after his car left the driveway. The Riverside account. A second mortgage Daniel had taken without Emily's knowledge. Payments he was managing in secret, a financial commitment he intended to restructure after the property sale closed on November 15th. Emily thought they were partners. She had spent 8 months building this plan, coordinating with Roy Dalton, managing my paralysis and my performance, and the 32 Ridgeline Road listing, and her husband had a parallel financial arrangement she knew nothing about. Daniel was not her partner. He was running his own calculation alongside hers, and the two calculations did not fully overlap. I thought about joints. Specifically, I thought about what happens when 2 pieces of a joint are cut by different people working from different measurements. They look like they fit. They hold under light pressure, but apply real weight, the kind of weight that comes from a legal proceeding in a room full of people, and documents and consequences, and the gap between the 2 pieces becomes visible. And a joint with a gap is not a joint. It is 2 pieces of wood that happen to be touching. Emily and Daniel were touching. They were not joined. I pulled out the burner phone and sent Junior a single text. Daniel has a separate account. Riverside, second mortgage. Emily doesn't know. Junior's reply came in 4 minutes. "I'll find it." This changes things. I put the phone away and looked out the kitchen window at the workshop at the back of the yard, solid and weathered and exactly where I had built it 30 years ago. And I thought about what Margaret had said in her letter, the full letter, the parts I had not shared with Junior or Pete, because some things you hold close until you understand them well enough to use them. She had written, "He will crack before she does Tom. Watch Daniel, he's the weak joint." She had been right about everything else. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the property and sat there in the cold October air, black and still, and watching the yard with the patient attention of something that has nowhere else to be and nothing else to do but wait. 5 days. The weak joint had just shown itself. Carol Whitman knocked at 10:15, which was 18 minutes after Emily's Subaru pulled out of the driveway. I had not told Carol to come. She had come because she had been watching the way good neighbors watch, not with suspicion, but with the accumulated attention of 25 years of proximity. The kind of knowing that builds so gradually you don't notice it until the moment it becomes necessary. She stood on my porch in a barn jacket and rubber-soled boots, holding a loaf of banana bread in both hands, with the slightly formal offering of someone who has brought a reason to knock that isn't quite the real reason. "Tom," she said, "you look better than I expected." "People keep saying that," I said. "Come in." Carol Whitman was 67 years old and had lived in the white colonial next door since 1999, which was the year her husband Gerald had taken the position at UNC Asheville, and they had driven up from Spartanburg with 2 kids in the back seat and a moving truck following behind. Gerald had died in 2018 heart attack, sudden the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare, and Carol had stayed in the Colonial because the Colonial was home, and because Margaret had been next door, and because some roots go deep enough that pulling them up requires more than grief alone. She and Margaret had been friends in the particular way of women who live 30 feet apart for 20 years, a friendship built from borrowed eggs and shared concerns, and the 1,000 small observations that accumulate between two houses with no fence between them. Carol had been at Margaret's bedside twice in the final weeks. She had brought food every Friday for the first 2 months after the funeral, arriving at the back door rather than the front, because she understood without being told that front door grief is public grief and back door grief is the real kind. I brought her into the kitchen and made coffee, and we sat at Margaret's table and Carol set the banana bread between us without unwrapping it, and we looked at each other with the directness of two people who have decided that the available time is too short for approach. "I saw the truck," she said. I set down my mug. "Tell me, the night of the 18th. Friday night." She reached into her barn jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the kind torn from a notepad. The handwriting careful and deliberate, the way people write when they know what they're writing down matters. I couldn't sleep. Knee was bothering me the way it does in October when the weather turns. I was up at 1:30 and I saw headlights in your driveway. A box truck, not a moving truck, smaller like a delivery size. 3 men got out. "Emily told you about the cleaning," I said. It wasn't a question. Carol's mouth pressed together. "She came over about a week before. Said she was hiring people to clear out some storage, that there might be some late activity, not to be alarmed." She looked at me steadily. I wasn't alarmed, but I was paying attention. There's a difference. "What made you write down the plate?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the October wind moved through the maple in my front yard, the same maple that had been there when we moved in, that Margaret had strung lights in every December, that was now bare and angular against the gray morning sky. "Margaret called me in August," Carol said. 2 months before she died. She said." Carol stopped, cleared her throat, pressed her fingers flat against the table surface, steadying herself. She said, "Carol, if you ever see something at Tom's house that doesn't feel right, write it down. Don't call the police right away. Just write it down and keep it and give it to Tom when he needs it." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying, the particular composure of a woman who has already cried about this and arrived here on the other side of it. I asked her what she meant. She said she hoped I'd never need to know. I looked at the piece of paper on the table. A box truck license plate, North Carolina plates, 7 characters, written in Carol's careful hand, with the date and time noted beneath it. October 18th, 1:32 in the morning. In North Carolina, eyewitness testimony combined with documented evidence, a written record made contemporaneously with the observed event, carries significant weight in both civil and criminal proceedings. A license plate recorded at the time of observation, in the handwriting of the observer with date and time noted, constitutes exactly the kind of corroborating evidence that transforms a victim's account from assertion into documented fact. The truck traced through its plates would connect Daniel's operation directly to a commercial entity that could be subpoenaed. That was 9 pieces of evidence. "Did you see Emily?" I asked. "I heard her," Carol said. "Your windows were dark, but mine wasn't, and the night was quiet. I heard her voice directing the men. I couldn't make out words, just the voice." She paused. "I know Emily's voice, Tom. I've been listening to it from next door for 3 months." I picked up the piece of paper. The plate number was written twice, once at the top, once at the bottom, as though Carol had doubted herself and confirmed it. The time was precise, 1:32. The date was underlined. Margaret had asked her to do this in August. 2 months before she died, 3 months before any of this happened, Margaret had called her neighbor and asked her to pay attention and write things down. My wife had been preparing this defense from every direction available to her, from the wooden box in the workshop, from the bank statements in the sealed envelope, from the letter with its careful instructions, and from a phone call to a neighbor with a bad knee who couldn't sleep on October nights, asking her to be present in a way I had not known to ask for myself. "She knew," I said. The words came out rougher than I intended. Carol reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Warm, dry, the hand of a woman who had been a neighbor for 25 years and had decided that was sufficient grounds for this. "She knew you," Carol said. "She knew you wouldn't see it coming. She knew you trusted people more than the evidence usually warranted." A small pause. "She said that. In August. She said, 'Tom trusts too much. I need people around him who trust the right amount.'" I looked at the plate number in my hand. Margaret had not left me one weapon. She had left me an arsenal deployed in advance from positions I hadn't known were occupied: a wooden box in a workshop, a bank envelope, a photograph, a letter, and a neighbor with a notepad and a bad knee and 25 years of accumulated attention. She had fought this war before it started. "Harold Nice," I said, "I'm going to need you to write down everything you saw and heard that night. Date, time, the truck, the voices, everything. And I'm going to need you to be willing to say it again to other people." Carol looked at me with Margaret's expression, the one that said the answer was obvious, and the question had only been asked out of courtesy. "Tom," she said, "why do you think I came over the moment Emily's car left the driveway?" She unwrapped the banana bread. We ate it at Margaret's table while Carol told me everything she had seen and heard and written down, and I listened to every word. And outside, the maple tree stood bare and patient in the October air, the same tree that had been there through 40 years of ordinary mornings, and one extraordinary one holding its ground, the way things do when they have been properly rooted. 4 days. Margaret's army was complete. Pete called me Thursday morning, 2 days before the signing. His sister-in-law at First National had found the record. The bracelet in the photograph, the thin gold chain Emily had been wearing since she was 16, had been used as collateral on a personal line of credit, taken out in Margaret's name in January 2021. Margaret had never signed for it. The signature on the application was not hers. Emily had borrowed against her mother's name while her mother was still alive. That was the 10th piece of evidence, and it was the one that connected everything else: the ring, the bank statements, the pattern that Margaret had seen coming before any of us had thought to look. Emily put flowers on the dining room table at 7 in the morning. White chrysanthemums. She had never once put flowers on that table in 3 months of living here. Margaret had always said white flowers in a dining room made her think of hospitals. Emily had grown up in this house. She knew exactly what cut flowers on that table signaled, and she had put them there anyway, which told me she was no longer thinking about what the house meant. She was thinking about what it was worth. I had been awake since 4:30, running through everything one final time. By 7, I was watching her from the hallway with the expression of a confused old man, while my mind ran clean and certain behind it. "Just some paperwork this morning," she said. "Nothing to worry about, Dad." "Of course," I said. I went upstairs, locked the bathroom door, and texted Junior, "They're setting up. How far out? 40 seconds, 2 blocks. Pete's with me. Say the word." Daniel came down at 8 in a vest and tie, briefcase in hand. The full architecture of a man who had decided that appearance and reality were separate categories worth investing in differently. Roy Dalton arrived at 9:15. He glanced at me in Margaret's chair and completed his assessment in under 2 seconds. He had already decided what I was. At 9:45, a young couple arrived, late 30s, the woman carrying a leather folder. The man dressed up slightly for an occasion he trusted was legitimate. They had put $12,000 into this transaction. They had no idea what they had walked into. The woman looked around the living room at the craftsman woodwork and the built-in bookshelves and said quietly, "It's a beautiful home." "It is," I said. She smiled at me, the way people smile at someone they have been told needs gentleness. At 10 o'clock, Emily gathered everyone at the table. Roy laid out the documents in sequence: guardianship petition, power of attorney, property transfer authorization. Daniel opened his briefcase beside it. The buyers sat with their leather folder. The chrysanthemums stood in the center of everything. Emily placed a pen in front of me. Then the power of attorney form, my name printed above an empty signature line. "Just your name, Dad," she said. "You've signed it thousands of times." I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. I looked at the camera hidden behind Margaret's photograph above the mantel, the lens that had been recording this room for 13 days, that Emily had never once looked for, because you don't look for what you don't know is there. "Let me get my glasses," I said. "I can't read without my glasses." I walked into the hallway, pulled the burner phone from my shirt pocket, typed 2 words. "Come in." Then I stood in the house I had built in 1987 and breathed in 4 counts and out 4 counts and waited. 15 seconds. The front door opened. Before I reveal the climax where the entire truth is finally exposed, please type the word justice or the number 888 in the comments right now, so I know you're still here with me. And please note the story ahead contains some fictionalized elements and may not be entirely accurate. If you prefer not to listen, feel free to turn off the video right now. Junior stepped through the door and Emily's performance collapsed in a single syllable. Junior. Flat. Stripped of every warm register she had maintained for 3 months. "Hi, Em," Junior said. 2 words, cold as November. Pete closed the front door behind him. I walked back to the head of the dining room table, the same position Emily had arranged for my signing, and set my phone on the table screen up. I opened the camera footage. Emily's voice came through the speaker without distortion, recorded 13 days ago in her own living room. "He's completely gone. I don't think he'd notice if we moved him out tomorrow." The room went very quiet. I laid the evidence piece by piece across Margaret's table. The email chain, 11 weeks of correspondence initiating the sale of my property without my knowledge. The forged signature, the loop on my T, wrong the way it has been wrong every time someone who is not me signs my name. The bank records, Margaret's ring removed from her hand, pawned in February 2022, redeemed before anyone noticed. Margaret had documented every transaction. She had put the records in a box in my workshop 2 years before she died. I set that box on the table. I opened it and placed Margaret's letter beside the chrysanthemums. Daniel picked it up. He read it. His eyes moved down the page and found the place where the story he had been living inside turned out to be a different story than the one he had been told. He set the letter down and looked at Emily with an expression I had never seen from him. Not calculation, not ambition, but the specific look of a man who has just understood he never had the full map. Emily opened her mouth. "Don't," Daniel said. 1 word. Final. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. I placed Carol's folded paper on the table last. The license plate. 1:32 in the morning. October 18th. Written by a neighbor Margaret had called in August and asked to pay attention. 9 pieces. Every one of them irrefutable. Emily's hands pressed flat against the table. Her face had moved through calculation and performance and arrived somewhere I had not seen before, just her face. Her actual face. "Your mother loved you," I said. "She loved you while she documented everything you did. That's what you didn't account for. You thought this was about the house." I looked at my daughter without the distance I had been maintaining for 15 days. It was never about the house. Emily left at 2:15 without a word. I heard drawers opening and closing upstairs, the sound of someone packing fast, taking only what was necessary. Daniel had gone 40 minutes earlier, briefcase in hand, walking out with the blank expression of a man who had decided words were a liability. Roy left last, pausing in the hallway, looking at me with the face of a man measuring the distance between who he had intended to be and who he had become. "Thomas," he said. "Roy," I said. Then he was gone. Junior stayed 3 days. We worked through the legal aftermath systematically, one element at a time, the way you work a complex joint. A real estate attorney confirmed what we already knew: the listing agreement was void from inception. Every document built on that forged signature invalidated along with it. The property was mine. It had always been mine. Roy received a letter from the North Carolina State Bar the following week. I did not call him first. Emily and Daniel faced civil liability for the fraudulent listing and potential criminal charges for the forged documents. Their attorney advised them not to contact me. They didn't. What needed to be said had already been said at a dining room table with 9 pieces of evidence and a letter from a woman who had loved us all more than we deserved. Carol brought soup on Thursday. Chicken and rice left quietly on the back porch. I ate it at Margaret's table and thought about how Margaret had always said Carol had the best instincts of anyone she knew. She had been right about that too. In December, I opened the workshop with real intention for the first time. I set a length of white oak on the bench, picked up a handplane, and worked for 2 hours without stopping, without thinking about Emily or Roy or forged signatures or chrysanthemums on a table that was never theirs to set. I thought only about the wood, about what it wanted to become. I had built this house in 1987. I had built things that outlasted the intentions of the people who tried to take them. That was not nothing. I went inside, made coffee, and sat across from the empty chair where Margaret had been for 42 years. "We made it," I said. The mountains outside held their ground, patient, permanent present for all of it. It was enough. I am 71 years old, and I almost lost everything to the person I trusted most. If this grandpa story has taught me anything, it is this: love without honesty is not protection. It is permission. I gave Emily my trust, without asking her to earn it year after year, and I called that fatherhood. I was wrong. Do not make my mistake. Watch the people closest to you not with suspicion, but with the clear eyes that real love requires. Pay attention to what people do, not what they say they feel. I believe God kept my mind sharp that night for a reason. When my body failed, my thoughts did not. And that clarity saved everything Margaret and I had built together. This is my personal belief after 71 years of living: a house is not walls and wood. It is every ordinary morning that happened inside it. No one has the right to take that from you. No one. If this family story moved you, if you recognized something of your own life in mine, leave a comment below. I read everyone. Share this family story with someone who needs to hear it. And if grandpa stories like this one matter to you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this grandpa story. The stories ahead contain some fictionalized elements for narrative purposes. If that is not for you, no hard feelings at all, and I wish you well wherever you go next.